Yeah, please do. Yeah, please do.
Okay.
Maybe it's me.
No, it's Jan.
As well.
I don't know.
There's sherry, there's sukaro, and there's red wine. So just grab what you want to grab.
Ms. Carolus? Sorry, I think we are live. Sorry, I unmuted you there. Good day, everyone. I'm going to hand over to Ms. Carolus and you can go ahead. Sorry, you're muted now.
A very warm welcome to everybody. It's been a year since we launched the Defend Our Democracy campaign, and much has happened in the world and in our country. And so thank you for joining us on our Human Rights Day, which is, as we know, the anniversary of that brutal massacre in Sharpeville when 69 people were gunned down and over 180 people wounded. And so we thought it was appropriate for us to come together on this day and to reflect. And we have today our panelists. The first one who would be Sheila Sisulu. And then we must apologize for Tessa Dooms, who in fact we just got the news as we were convening that she's had a bereavement. Somebody very close to us just passed, literally as she was about to join us. And so she obviously is not able to join us. And we want to say to Tessa, extend our condolences from all of us gathered here today. And we wish her and everybody strength in this difficult journey that we're going to have. And then in addition to Sis Sheila, we have our esteemed advocate Katobi Tembeka and Vali Mosa, longtime activists from the 70s in student politics on a very long journey, as indeed Sheila is. So just a very warm welcome, and I think without much ado, I'm going to just ask Sheila, who is in fact part of the Defend Our Democracy Secretariat, to just do a few opening remarks for us. Sheila Sisulu, over to you.
Yeah, I've just unmuted myself. Thank you very much, Cheryl, for that introduction, and to say hello to everyone on this very gloomy Human Rights Day in Johannesburg. I don't know what the rest of the country is like, but I'm glad to be here and to participate in this rally. Yes, as Cheryl said, it's a year since the Defend Our Democracy was launched. And in that time, we have been involved in many events, leading them, supporting others, partnering with others, including, for instance, this week being anti-corruption, no, not the anti-racism week. We've done the anti-corruption week. We picketed outside Charlotte Maxeke because of how it's taken so long to repair that hospital and admit people. We've been part of the Political Party Funding Act to make sure that parties, and I'm hoping that Comrade Valley will speak to that. And we've had the People's Sauna. So we've had a number of activities that were focusing on what it means to defend our democracy. Each time there would be an attempt to challenge it, and there have been many. We tried to stop that in the tracks. And we are heading towards a conference and hope that many of you will attend the Conference for Democratic Renewal, in which we would like to take a stand for people-centered politics and grassroots-based politics. I think one of the errors all of us made from 1994 was to outsource our power to elected officers, to government officials, and thinking or believing they will do what they were supposed to do according to the Constitution. And as I was thinking of that, I just wondered to myself, if one were to do a little poll of the elected officials, and I will dare say beginning with the president, who was part of formulating the Constitution, right up to your local ward councillor, and you said to them, what is the opening line of the preamble to the Constitution? I don't know how many would be able to tell you that it is we, the people of South Africa. And how many of them will tell you that in that section of the Constitution, it says very clearly that having been elected freely, they are the custodians of the Constitution. I don't know how many would actually get to that. And being a Human Rights Day, I don't know how many of them would be able to tell us the basic tenets of the Bill of Rights. It just occurred to me that with all the irresponsible statements, with all the claims of what the Constitution is or is not and what needs to happen, I don't know how many of them have actually read the preamble and the Bill of Rights. I'm not even going into any of the other areas because we have Advocate Ngugai Toby, who I listened to recently in a conversation with former Deputy Chief Justice Musaneke, talking about how Section 25 of the Constitution doesn't need to be amended because it has always enabled government to have the power on the land issue to expropriate land when necessary. But I will leave it to him to talk to those matters. But Cheryl has already said we remember Sharpeville today. We remember how the people in Sharpeville didn't only fight for their rights to be treated as human beings without having a passbook hanging around their necks, so to speak. And they fought for all of us. And Human Rights Day is also to commemorate that day. One of the lines in the preamble, of course, says, South Africa belongs to all who live in it. That takes me to the issue of xenophobia. People are trying to finesse it and say, no, it's about illegal immigrants. Oh, no, it's about immigrants who come and disrespect our law. The Constitution is clear. It is about people, all people who live in South Africa. The criminality must not be an excuse to disrespect the human rights of others, whether they've come across the border or not. We need to respect their human rights, and we can't stop criminality with turning ourselves into criminals. My last point is about the other danger to our democracy. It's about ignorance of our history, past, in the distant past and recent. I heard one of the xenophobia people saying, oh, the worst thing that President Mandela did was to get rid of influx control. If I hadn't been sitting, I would have fallen. But it was like, does this person even understand what that was about? It had nothing to do with controlling the influx of people from outside South Africa. It had everything to do with controlling the movement of South Africans in South Africa, in particular Black South Africans. It had to do with people of Indian origin not being allowed to live in or even cross the Free State. So when people go into this area and as activists and basically, in my view, vigilantes, they at least need to know their history. So in saying that, I think it's very important for us on days like these and every day to share with young people, with older people who are ignorant, where we've been and where we still need to be going. We haven't finished. There is a lot that we still have to do. And I think it is our responsibility, all of us, to make sure that our actions are informed by history and informed by facts. So I wish all the participants a good conversation and look forward to hearing from my other panelists. Thanks, Cheryl.
Thank you very much, Sis Sheila. Okay, we've got it. Thank you, Sis Sheila. I just some housekeeping that I need to indicate to everyone in on the chat to say that please post your questions in the chat and we will allocate them to various people. You can either say you would like to ask a particular panelist a question, or otherwise just leave it up to the powers vested in me to do that. Yeah. I think that I've indicated to colleagues who've only just joined us that Tessa Dooms, who was supposed to join us minutes before she was due to join us, actually had a bereavement, and we wish her and the family much strength, so she obviously won't be able to join us. And so I want to just thank Sheila. We were hoping to put together an intergenerational chat with Tessa and Tembeka Sheila and Valley as the old people here, the official old people. So we one person down on the younger generation, but there are lots of you on the conversation, so please don't join us. I think we also want to say that this year has been a terrible year for South Africa and the world, but it's also been a year where we have witnessed the power of action by civil society, which was our primary objective when we launched the Defend Our Democracy campaign a year ago. And we've seen civil society bring to book some of the perpetrators and some of the violators. And we do need to salute those amongst us who have used instruments or institutions which have in fact been created through the democratic process and have used this, put this to good use by using laws, of which of course our highest law is the Constitution itself. People have used our courts. And in particular, we want to remember those who have been murdered, whether it's in land rights activism, whether it's in anti-corruption activism. And then, of course, we want to, I think it's also appropriate for us to salute the civil society organizations who are part of us in this loose coalition that we have. And I'll just mention a few, which is a very dangerous thing to do. But Section 27, who's in fact brought to us some of the airings we're hearing at Life Esidimeni at the moment, and we wish everybody involved with the families primarily lots of strength for the third time they're having to go through it. Our comrades and colleagues from Abahlali, and we note the fallen who have been murdered in their stand about around various acts of unlawfulness and violations. Outer, Corruption Watch, Equal Education, and the various foundations. I do think it's important because we started off a year ago thinking of how we could collaborate and put all our efforts together. So whilst we remain concerned, angry, and determined, I hope that the session will also enable us to reflect on the learnings, how we can do what we've done better, the progress and the new opportunities that exist for the next year, so that we can keep moving forward and that we can, in fact, keep on building and strengthening our democracy. Because I think what we're learning and what we have learned and what we need to learn more is democracy is not a spectator sport. And we are not there. It's going to mean we just have to keep on rolling our sleeves and keep on keeping on. Sheila, you were referring earlier to a panel with Advocate Kaitoibi and former Deputy Chief Justice, when Justice Moseneki said to me, "How are you?" And I said, "I'm not okay, actually. I'm hopping mad." But I think it is important for us as we are hopping mad to remember that since last year, we have actually started to bring some accountability and some order, a long way from ideal, but hopefully we can get there. So colleagues, it is my pleasure to in fact introduce you our next participant, and that is Valley Musa, who said I know how much he hates long CVs and all of that, so I'm not going to do that. But just a brief run, Valley has, of course, been an activist since the 70s in the Black Consciousness Movers, SASO, through into the UDF, the Anti-President's Council, went on into government, was a minister in various ways, some of which is being put to good use now, his experience there. Valley was the Minister of Constitutional Affairs, one of the portfolios he held, and the other one, which I remember him for very strongly, that is also taken into his activism, is in fact, he was Minister for the Environment and Tourism. And in both, so Valley, I won't mention the other ministries you were associated with, but in both the environmental affairs and in fact in that constitutional one to this day, Valley carries on with activism in those two sites of struggle. Valley has recently been very much close to the process that shepherded the Political Party Funding Act. That's now the law, that parties across the board are not quite sure what they want to make of it. And Valley will be happy to speak with us on that if needs be, and hopefully we'll speak a bit about that. But he's also got, at the moment he's involved in looking at a matter which has caused us great vexation, and that is electoral reform, because we understand that our learning of the 25 years of democracy has said to us that we really need to look seriously at how accountability can be strengthened through having this. So I ask you to join me in welcoming Vali Musa, currently very much a political activist. Vali, over to you.
Thank you very much, Sis Cheryl, and greetings to everybody who is present. And my congratulations to the Defend Our Democracy movement for organizing this meeting, and also for all of the work that you have been doing over the past year. I will talk on two topics. The first is the electoral the Electoral Act Amendment Bill, which is before Parliament, and then I will also reflect a little bit on political party funding. Now, free and fair elections. This is I think, one of the greatest successes of the South African democracy. A new electoral system is currently under consideration by Parliament, and we should all be alarmed because it places this monumental achievement of free and fair elections, the great achievement of our freedom struggle, at risk. The proposed new system is complex to understand, complicated to implement, and less fair than the current electoral systems of national, provincial, and municipal government. The right of the people of South Africa to choose their own government is the constant heartbeat that keeps our democracy alive. To tinker with this is to tinker with the lifeblood of our democracy. So our parliamentarians should tread very, very carefully when they change the electoral system. Our constitution firmly entrenches human rights. The Bill of Rights can only be amended by a supermajority of 2/3. But the Constitution, in its very first clause, has a set of values, and it refers to them as values, which occupy a status higher than the Bill of Rights. The values are A, human dignity, the achievement of equality and the advancement of human rights and freedoms. B, non-racialism and non-sexism. C, supremacy of the Constitution and the rule of law. D, universal adult suffrage, a common voters' roll, regular elections, and a multi-party system of government to ensure accountability, responsiveness, and openness. Now, this first clause of the Constitution, which I've just read to you, was colloquially referred to among members of the Constitutional Assembly as the unalterable clause. Article 74(1)(a) of the Constitution requires a 75% vote in Parliament if this clause is to be amended. In other words, a super majority. The intention is that it should never be changed. Such is the worth that is given in the Constitution to the right to vote. These short values constitute the soul of our Constitution. They are the values of the great South African freedom struggle. It is no wonder that the sight of millions of people lining to vote on 27th April 1994 has become the iconic symbol of our freedom. Fiddle with the right to vote thoughtlessly or temper with it for narrow party political advantage if you want a mass rebellion. So far, Parliament has rejected all public opinion. Since 1994, 3 high-level advisory bodies were established by government. The first was led by Van Zyl Slabbert, the second by former President Kgalema Motlanthe, and the third most recent ministerial advisory committee was chaired by myself. I'm not talking today in that capacity, I must say. Parliament has rejected the majority recommendation of all 3 of the advisory bodies, which span an entire generation. Bear in mind that each one of these bodies were official bodies. They were not NGOs. The bill under consideration proposes a completely new electoral system. Incredulously, It was not proposed by any of the political parties, civil society organizations, or academics who spoke to the Ministerial Advisory Committee. According to the new proposal, each province will be a gigantic constituency. A voter in the Eastern Cape, for example, will have to choose between voting for an individual independent candidate of her choice or for a political party. After the election, it is proposed that a first quota for each seat is calculated and all independents qualifying are allocated a seat. Then all the votes of such candidates are cancelled from further counting. A second quota of a smaller size is determined again, and those independents that qualify are allocated seats. The votes that were cast for the second round of independents are then cancelled. After these two rounds are completed, the remaining seats are allocated to political parties by means of a third quota. The proposed system constitutes a disaster in waiting on a number of grounds. Firstly, it is a completely new electoral system, not backed up by any literature or analysis. Not a single political party, including the majority party, has published an analytical paper explaining the wisdom of the proposed new system. This is a system that does not exist anywhere in the world, perhaps for good reason. Without any political analysis and without any mathematical analysis, the risk of unintended consequences are very high. Secondly, it violates the constitutional requirement of proportional representation. Votes cast for independent candidates above a certain quota are discarded, removed from the count. Gone is the now long-held strength of our electoral system that every vote counts. Thirdly, it is so complex and complicated that hardly anyone in the political leadership of our country seems to understand it. I have personally spoken to a number of them. Not only are they unable to explain the thinking behind the proposed system, many have no knowledge of it. Believe it or not, that's the case. It would be safe to assume that most ordinary members of the EFF, DA, and ANC have not been consulted on the proposed system. A system shrouded in mystery provides fertile ground for Trump-like claims of being cheated. Fourthly, the principle of one person, one vote of equal value is disregarded. A voter can either vote for an independent or vote for a party list. If the voter puts an X next to the name of an independent, she gets to influence the filling of one seat in parliament. If the voter votes for a party list, she gets to influence the filling of up to 80 seats, if we're talking about the Eastern Cape. Makes one think of P.W. Botha's tricameral parliament, in which coloureds and Indians were given the vote, but just not one of equal value. Fifthly, in this complex system, the name of every independent candidate from anywhere in the Eastern Cape province and each political party will feature on one ballot paper. If the constituency is to be as large as the province, the ballot paper will run into many pages. In the 2021 local government elections, there were a total of 11,237 registered candidates for the Eastern Cape. These are properly registered candidates. Even if a mere 10% of these run as independents in the national elections, there could be over 1,000 independent candidates in the Eastern Cape. So even with a fairly stringent requirements for candidates to qualify, the numbers will be large. Imagine the situation where a voter in the Eastern Cape is confronted with a ballot paper containing 1,000 or 1,200 candidates. Some proponents of the new system suggest that the number of independent candidates can be reduced by setting extremely onerous requirements for independents to qualify. It has even been suggested that a candidate should be required to collect up to 20,000 signatures. The candidate will have to properly administer this so that the identity of each signatory is properly verifiable in a court if need be. frankly, only a super rich candidate will be able to afford the administrative machinery to put together all of this in meticulous detail. In short, the ordinary candidate will simply be disenfranchised. A sixth point to make is that when a vacancy occurs, the by-election will have to be held in the constituency, which is the province. So there will have to be frequent provincial elections. Any system that results in frequent provincial elections is frankly ridiculous. And the final glaring observation is that the constitutional principle of proportional representation will not be adhered to. All this complexity and obfuscation to feed the mortal fear our political parties have of granting voters even a tiny modicum of any kind of direct representation. That's my comments on what's before Parliament currently, and I do hope that it doesn't see the light of day. I don't think it will, frankly. It's just for the reasons that I've given you. I'd like to make, Sir Cheryl, just a few comments on the Political Party Funding Act, because there's been a lot that's been said about that in the media recently. When our constitution was adopted by the Constitutional Assembly in 1996, it had phenomenal strengths. I mean, it's a great constitution, but one of the glaring weaknesses is that it did not regulate the lives of political parties, nor did it create any regulation that deals with money and politics. And this has been a great weakness. We had always thought at the time that after the constitution is adopted, perhaps Parliament will do something about it. But it didn't happen. And then during the time of state capture, in other words, during the time of the Zuma administration, when the country was so concerned about many things, Parliament did adopt finally what was referred to as a Political Party Funding Act. And that's an act that has taken away many, many vulnerabilities that we have. And I want to talk about a few of those. The first is that our political system, like most democratic political systems, can only function if we have political parties in existence. It is even, with independent candidates, etc., the political party is central to the functioning of our democracy. And therefore, the honesty and integrity of the political party is important. It's important that our political parties are what they say they are, political parties, and not something else. So the biggest vulnerability that we had in our parliament is that our political parties will get to be owned by foreign governments. Up to this act came into operation last year, we were the only country in the world that allowed political parties in parliament to be funded by foreign governments. And once that happens, it takes away the sovereignty of our parliament. It takes away a parliament which is owned by the people, because it begins to be owned by foreign governments. And we all know, we can name a number of them, foreign governments who are lining up to fund our political parties so that they can control our parliament and they can decide what South Africa would be all about. So that's the first thing this act does, is that it has a list of allowable and not allowable donors. One of the not allowable donors is foreign governments and foreigners. Our parliament should belong to the people of South Africa, not to foreign governments or not to people who pay taxes and are governed by other laws elsewhere. So it clears that up once and for all. It also disallows any donation directly or in any way indirectly from state-owned enterprises or from any government or state agency unless it is coming through the Independent Electoral Commission. So that has been cleared up, and we all know what's been happening as far as that is concerned. So the first part, it deals with allowable and not allowable. believe it or not, there was no list of not allowable donors up to this act, when this act came into operation in April 2021. The second thing it does is that it places limits on how much a political party can take from a single donor. And this is to prevent the capture of our political parties. If a political party gets almost all of its money from one rich individual or one corporate or one source, it will be beholden to that source. In a democracy, a political party should be beholden to the people who vote for that party and to the people of South Africa as a whole and to the Constitution, not to a donor. And therefore it sets an upper limit. For the first time, it said there's a limit to how much a party can take from each donor, and it sets the limit at 15 million rands per annum. Those of us who were doing advocacy work when this bill was in Parliament had argued that the limit should be much, much lower. I personally argued that the limit should be in the region of 1 million rand. That will take us more in line with international trends. But Parliament, the political parties, of course, in the end decided on 15 million. So that's what we've got. It's, I still think it's a good thing. I still think it's a good thing we've got a limit. The third element that this party introduces is transparency. Because a vote, if you say one person, one vote of equal value is sacred for us as South Africans, then the vote is meaningless if the voter does not know who he or she is voting for. If you think you're voting for party A, but actually party A belongs to the Guptas or belongs to, I don't know, somebody else, then you should know who it belongs to. Because political parties are not football clubs that should be owned by people. Therefore, there should be full transparency on who is giving your party money. And so this act says that all donations above 100,000 rands must be published by the IEC every quarter. So every 3 months, the IEC must inform the voters that your party is getting money from the following people, above 100,000 rands. I had, of course, argued that it should have been above 10,000 rands. And I think that if you look at what came out in the Zondo Commission, there was a hell of a lot of funny business going on for amounts less than 100,000 rands. But anyway, that's what the law says. It's still a good thing. It introduces transparency, all donations above 100,000 rands. And it begins to bring us into the modern world. Now, so Cheryl, the interesting thing is that this act is in operation so far for less than 1 year. And the political parties, and I'm not just talking about the ANC, the political parties in Parliament, because remember the DA, when Parliament was discussing this bill, the DA argued that there should be no transparency whatsoever. They said that their policy is opposed to any kind of transparency. So all the parties are now arguing that the bill is problematic, etc., and they want to change the limits. They want to increase the 100,000 rand to a much bigger number. So they're saying that you should only have to declare amounts less than a few million rands, and the 15 million rands, they seem to want to increase that to about 100 million rands they can take from each. If these limits are changed, frankly, the act is as good as having been repealed. This is a great danger that we face, and anybody who's interested in the human right of the right to vote and is interested in defend our democracy is well advised to keep your antennas up and speak up before it's too late. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Vali. Much food for thought there. And I think the biggest thing is that we all often feel Parliament and our lawmakers are not doing enough. And what Valia said, there are two pieces of legislation which are quite critical, that in fact we ourselves in this forum had raised for years now, calling for transparency around this. And so my question is to all of us here on the platform is to say that whilst the Constitution has inbuilt requirements for public participation, how many of us have actually used those? Because in the passing of these pieces of legislation, such as the reform on the Electoral Act and the recent one that, the funding of the political parties, which is now law, and then this one that's under debate, and clearly as Valley has indicated, whilst the funding bill is in its infancy, it's not even a year old, and so many of the parties, most of the parties in Parliament are already attacking it. And I would venture to say, maybe it's because none of us have actually come out sufficiently in support on that. And we are now in the process of the electoral reform bill. The challenge really is, please, can we step up and make sure that we make our voices heard? Because as Valley said, this is contested terrain. And I think it's a good segue into Advocate Dukaitoibi's one of his biggest intellectual contributions in the overall jurisprudence in our country has in fact been around the fact that he's challenged us often about the fact that in our Constitution, there are incredible powers, limitations, and compulsion to accountability, which is just not invoked either by our lawmakers or by civil society. Advocate Dukaitoibi is one of our, and he always gets a bit all shy about it, but I want to assert that he is one of our greatest jurists at the time. We've seen him in action on a number of matters which has come before the Constitutional Court. And he's been an activist all his life. And I may also add, he did his clerks, his internship, his law clerking at the Constitutional Court of South Africa. So over to you, Advocate Dukaitoibi.
Thank you, Cheryl. I'm very pleased to be invited here, and it was a pleasure also listening to Valley on the electoral reforms. Given my own involvement in that case, I'm going to watch with interest if there will be a basis to challenge the amendment as unconstitutional. My topic today is to talk about why constitutionalism, the rule of law, and human rights require renewed political activism. I should start by discussing these topics, constitutionalism, the rule of law, and human rights. My primary concern with South Africa's democratic project at this stage is the gap between the promise of the Constitution and its enforcement or implementation. When the Constitution was adopted in 1994, South Africa had inherited several features of the apartheid state. One of them was fragmentation of administration and fragmentation of the political system. The second was an unaccountable government. The Sharpeville massacre is one of those, where approximately 45 policemen were in fact involved in the shooting, but they were nevertheless not held accountable. The third one was the exclusion of the majority of the population from enjoying rights of citizenship. And the fourth was racialized inequality. The Constitution was adopted in order to overcome these features of the apartheid state. It did so in several ways. I want to highlight only four. The first one was by imposing the Constitution as the supreme law. And this is crucial, and we should never overlook its significance. Because instead of the politicians in parliament being supreme, in this country we have the Constitution itself being supreme. And the interpretation of the Constitution that is regarded as final is the interpretation given by judges, not the interpretation given by parliament, which is a radical departure from the parliamentary system that was in vogue under apartheid. The second feature of the Constitution is a guarantee of formal and substantive equality. It was a unique attribute of the apartheid government that it was founded on inequality, but our Constitution guarantees both formal equality in the sense that we are all equal before the law, and substantive equality in the sense that we should socially, economically, and politically all be equal. The third, which is supportive of the second feature, is socio-economic rights. Very few constitutions across the world will contain a promise that the government will guarantee access to adequate housing. It will guarantee access to adequate health care. It will guarantee access to adequate social security, access to food, access to land. But our Constitution does. And in this sense, it stands apart from many constitutions in the world. And in making this point, I don't argue that it therefore means it is the best, but it is certainly distinguishable and stands apart from comparative constitutions in the world. And the fourth feature of this Constitution is that in addition to the elected institution, addition to the judiciary, it imposes institutions to support constitutional democracy. And those institutions that are imposed to support constitutional democracy have vast powers. And those powers sometimes mean that their decisions are binding on the government. An example here is the Public Protector, the Human Rights Commission, the Commission on Gender Equality. Those are institutions that are intended to safeguard and uphold the democratic system, but they operate outside of the elected parliament and outside of the elected executive and alongside the judicial system. So how have we fared then, if these were the promises and this is the world in which we inherited? The promise then of the Constitution was that there would be a gradual move towards egalitarianism, towards equality. But if we are to be frank, that promise has not been fulfilled. The formal and substantive equality has not been met. Instead, this is what has happened. The economic upper echelons have deracialized at a remarkable pace. They have created a superclass, but poverty at the bottom half of the population has become entrenched and perhaps multiplied. And over the past 25 years, what we have seen is the enrichment at an incredible speed of the 20% of African households through schemes like the Black Economic Empowerment, and correctly, through the professionalization of the public sector. But at the same time, that development, which is the deracialization of the upper classes, has taken place alongside the impoverishment of the bottom 40%. And that bottom 40% is not deracialized. It is not multiracial. It is almost exclusively African and colored, that bottom 40%. And so the income of the top 20% of African households, and that's approximately 6 to 7 million people, has in fact over the last 25 years increased by more than 60%. and that is a good thing. But the income of the bottom 40%, and that's approximately 20 million people, has declined by the same percentage, 50 to 60%. Of course, this picture might generate some cynicism about the emergence of the Black elite. My point is that without the deracialization of the upper classes, the idea of a new South Africa would simply not have been possible. But at the same time, I'm trying to underscore a broader problem, which is that the formation of the Black elite strata has coincided with the rapid expansion of a Black underclass. And so current discourses, and one of them, and the World Bank is to blame for this, and its research recently has shown that South Africa still occupies the distinctive status of being the most unequal country in the world, and perhaps most unequal society rather than country in the world. A debate about racial inequality, therefore, always obscures the reality of the growing African underclass. And it is that growing African underclass that threatens the economic prosperity of the deracialized and super wealthy upper class. That is the greatest challenge facing constitutionalism. If you impose an advanced legal system on a society with such levels of inequality, you are creating a recipe for disaster. What should we do about this? My concern has been that the language of constitutionalism has been appropriated by lawyers. I say that as a lawyer myself. But constitutionalism does not belong to the lawyers. The document called the Constitution has become a legal document, but its origin is a political statement of claims. All constitutions originate from political claims. The most important political claim of the 20th century has been the claim towards equality. So what that means is that the primary obligation to interpret and implement the Constitution is that of the executive. Let me repeat this because it often gets overlooked. The primary obligation to interpret and implement the Constitution is that of the executive. Parliament is required to create a framework through laws for the implementation of the Constitution by the executive. But if we are to be fair to each other, the last period, perhaps 15 years, what we have witnessed is that the people that are at the forefront of violating the Constitution are people that occupy the executive role in this country, from the president right to the entire cabinet, which is a distortion of the expectation under the Constitution. The second category of persons we have witnessed as violating the Constitution has been Parliament. Parliament has violated the Constitution in two ways. The first one is through omissions. They have omitted to give effect to a range of promises that are contained in the framework of the Constitution. One of them is under section 25(6) of the Constitution, which says that there should be a legal framework for the redistribution of land in South Africa. And it places it as an obligation. For the last 27 years, Parliament has failed to enact legislation for land redistribution. Parliament has also failed through another omission. Parliament is required to pass legislation to ensure that where compensation is paid in an expropriation setting, that compensation doesn't follow the apartheid era legislation. But up until now, Parliament has failed to ensure that the legislation is passed. There have been several attempts, 3 in fact, to pass the legislation. There is a current one But all of this illustrates the problem of the violation of the Constitution by Parliament through omissions. Parliament has also violated the Constitution because it has passed laws that are inconsistent with the Constitution. We now hear that they are about to do the same thing from Comrade Valimusa, who tells us that they are about to pass legislation that is impractical, unimplementable, and quite frankly, self-serving, because if you listen to him carefully, the entire architecture of the Electoral Amendment Act is intended to benefit not the people, but the political parties represented in Parliament. So if we know then that contrary to constitutional promise, at the forefront of the violation of the Constitution has been the executive. I ran a case, it was all public, where members of the Defense Force beat up a man to death in Alex. The Minister of Defense refused to suspend them until the judges told them that they should. We were all here in 2012. Members of the police shot and killed 34 people that were striking. It took a long time before we could see accountability for the massacre of Marikana. If we know those facts, what can we do about them? I want to come then to the last point. I know your organization is called Defend Democracy, but I want to suggest that defending democracy requires its advancement and its deepening. And that is one, making sure that ordinary people know about it, know about its contents, and know about the rights that it provides. Often our own discourses of constitutionalism are conducted in a language that is exclusionary because it is not spoken by the majority of South Africans. Secondly, the entire judicialization of the Constitution is exclusionary. We have judicialized the Constitution too much and made it an elite document. The Constitution needs to be politicized. In other words, made to be a political instrument. The people need to be empowered to demand the enforcement of the Constitution. Houses, land, jobs, all of these are constitutional promises. And people ought to demand them rightly from the government. Thirdly, institutions of accountability ought to be strengthened. This is one of the most incredible things about this Constitution. It's built on the idea of accountability, including creating systems of accountability outside of Parliament, outside of the judiciary. One of those is the public protector. And rightly, there have been concerns that that office is being diverted from the constitutional mission. People ought to hold even the public protector accountable. How should this happen? I want to suggest that an organization like yourselves ought to be speaking to the marginalized, to the underclass. It ought to be taking constitutional education to my village in Tsala. It ought not to be enough that we are happy in elite conversations about constitutionalism. Because you know, Cheryl, when we do this, and I'm speaking to the converted, I know, when we do this, we create the space for the populists to distort the promise of the Constitution, to tell us that the Constitution came from Europe, and to tell the people that the Constitution serves the interests of the elite. Because we in the civil society are not connecting with the ordinary people, are not connecting through the language of constitutionalism. So if we are interested in resolving the greatest challenge facing this country, which is to resolve inequality through constitutional means, we need to break the barrier between ourselves and ordinary people. Thank you.
Thank you, Tembeka. What a great point to end on. And it talks right into some of the questions that have come through on the chat group. And maybe I'm going to kick us all off by just a common thread that seems to be coming through some of the questions in the chat room. And please do use that chat room to post your questions. So this is to all three the speakers, from Sishila to Udvali and Tembeka. Would the speakers agree with the observations that there is a process of the systematic erosion of our constitutional democracy underway? The person seems to think it's a rhetorical question because they say, if so, what are the key signs of this? Who wants to kick us off? Sishila?
Okay, Cheryl, I will. Yeah, no, it's not a rhetorical question, and it's not even a tautology, it is fact. And this has been happening for a long time. I think Vali's input puts the finer details of the recent attempts to steal our constitution by elected officials, by parliament, and the examples are a plethora. State capture is the biggest example of how our constitution was disrespected. Forget the issue of how a former head of state simply decided he is going to he's going to disrespect the Constitutional Court, the highest court in the land, by a former high officer of the country. And there have been many, and many of these actors are mimicking him, delaying court cases, as Advocate Ngugaitomi has said, making the institution a judicial issue rather than a political issue that empowers people. So as much as there has been a concerted effort to steal the country, there has been, I agree, a concerted effort to steal the Constitution and our democracy as well. There's no gainsaying that. But if I may, I'd like to just pick up on what Advocate Ngugaitobi was saying about the language of constitutionalism, that we should be speaking to people in their own languages, on radio, on community radio. And so we need to really refocus on making sure that the people are indeed our last line of defense. Thank you.
Thank you, Sishila. Vali, do you want to respond to that question?
I think Sishila has responded adequately to that. I don't have anything more to add at this stage.
Thank you, Vali. Tembeka, you want to add anything to that?
Yes, just one point about the erosion. It's clear that there are people that are interested in the erosion of the institutions of democracy. We see the constant attacks and the attempts, rather, to undermine judicial outcomes. And yet the judiciary is at the heart of the sustenance of constitutional democracy. So the evidence is there for everybody to see. My critique, however, is that the platform is created for those attacks to gain ground in society with the growing levels of inequality, particularly the super inequality at the bottom. Many people who witnessed, and let's focus on what we are talking about, which is the most glaring example of this phenomenon was the July unrest, July 2021 unrest. Now, the people that got locked up and arrested were ordinary, poor South Africans, right? Some of them might have joined on account of the fact that there's an opportunity to take something out of a shop. But others might have believed the rhetoric that was being spewed by political leaders that were involved in it. The question is why? Why did they believe them? And that is why I ask for a more structured analysis of our inability to translate the Constitution in language. I don't mean the literal translation. Constitution is available in every language. But I mean the language of constitutionalism, to take it away from a language of institutions into a language of houses, of jobs, a language that people understand, that when we say that there should be houses, we mean the Constitution must be implemented. So that still, for me, leaves this gap that I believe that activists have abandoned for good reasons. And this is not a criticism, because for the last 10 years, I myself spent a lot of my own legal energies on questions of accountability and not so much on questions of delivery of socio-economic rights. Thank you.
Okay.
So Cheryl, can I take the opportunity you gave me earlier that I'll let go?
Please do. And Vali,
Yeah.
while you're on the floor, can I put two questions as well that hopefully shouldn't be too long for you, specifically on the chat. The one says, from where did the idea of the new voting system emanate? And the other one is, how can we have a new voting system without any party having been consulted?
Yes, thank you. Let me deal with that first, and then I'll come back to the matter which Advocate Ngukai Toby and Sashila commented on. It's very interesting. It's hard to find an author of the Electoral Act Amendment Bill. I've spoken to various political leaders, people who call themselves political leaders from across political parties, and none of them seem to know where it comes from at all. It is the most amazing thing, because when you change an electoral system, you should make sure that the people of the country and the voters understand it and they want it. Or at least you can convince them, then you make them want it, or something of that sort. But let alone the voters, let alone the rank and file members of the political parties, even the leaders don't know. If you know any member of the National Executive Committee of the ANC, you can call the person after this meeting and say, what is the thinking behind this? I promise you, the person is going to say, I don't know. It wasn't discussed. I promise you that's the response you're going to get, because that's the response that I've got. So I can't tell you where it comes from at all. It's part of the autopilot thing that seems to happening in a number of, maybe, the people who've done it don't mean to do bad. I don't think they need to, but once you run away, once you're afraid of direct representation, once you have a fear of independent candidates, now the EFF, the DA and the ANC, somehow they think their biggest challenge in life is to make sure that the people who run away from them, who don't like them, don't challenge them as independents. That is their biggest fear. All these things that the advocate has said they're supposed to do, advancing socio-economic rights, this, that, whatnot, the thing that occupies them most is if Musi Maimane has broken away from us, we mustn't have an electoral system where he's going to stand up and challenge us and he may win. This is their biggest problem. I'm just giving an all three parties have people like those they are worried about. So they come up with something which is really a mishmash and which is going to cause the problems that I've said. That's where I think it comes to. On the question about the constitutional responsibilities of government, it's just one aspect that's been troubling me a lot, and that is the behavior of members of parliament. When you and I go to vote, we vote for a list of candidates. It's either called the ANC list or the EFF list, etc. And Parliament is the elected body. If you read the Constitution, and Tembeka is quite right, it's written in plain language. If you read it, you will see that Parliament is given one of the most important roles in our society. And we vote for Parliament. We don't vote for the president. We don't vote for the cabinet. We vote for the members of Parliament. Now, Parliament gets elected, 400 women and men. Now, once they get elected, they don't seem to think that it's their job really to apply their mind. It's their job to be political activists, and it's their job to make things better for the people of this country. They wait for their party headquarters to tell them what to do and what not to do. And they mainly get instructions about what not to do. And this is an abdication of responsibility, and frankly, such a big crime that our parliamentarians are doing. They are not doing their responsibility. If a matter comes up, they say we will wait for party headquarters to tell us what to do because we don't have minds. We are not the people that have been elected to represent the public. And so that's what they do. If you ask any of them why you're voting for something or not voting for something, again, they're going to tell you that. When it comes to changing the Political Party Funding Act, the ANC made this interesting announcement in December that they have decided, the NEC has decided to change the act. Sorry, I'm picking on the ANC because I happen to know a lot of people there. So I talk to them, I know what's happening there. And I'm a member of the ANC besides, in any case. So what happens is the ANC issued a statement saying they're going to amend the act. They're going to change these limits. No more transparency and all that. If you call a member of the NEC, you say, why did you decide that? They said, oh, it was mentioned at one NEC meeting, but it wasn't discussed at all. That is the response. So that's where it comes from. It's frankly an insult to those of us who are members of that party. But we'll continue to fight, Cheryl. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vali. Tembeka, I think there are a couple of questions that I want to throw to you that's come through on the chat for you. Some of them is very big and you can be as brief or choose for an offline chat. But how can constitutionalism and equality be made a reality for all? Similarly, what are short to medium term steps to promote ownership of the Constitution by all South Africans? And then, let me just scroll down. Vali and Tembeka, why was the critical institution of the Engineer General omitted in the development of the Constitution? Okay, so Tembeka, just a question about how can constitutional equality be made a reality for all? So I said that's a very big question, and I think that's probably the high level of what we're talking about here tonight.
Yes.
But go for it.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you. I mean, yes. Well, that is the question I'm worried about, is what actually can we do? My own suggestions about what can be done, and which is not the full scope of what should be done. If the first problem is making constitutionalism available across, particularly to ordinary people. I worry about the extent to which it is so easy to distort the meaning of the Constitution, and for those distorters to be believed. It is breathtaking, the extent to which it's easy to make people believe that the Constitution says X, but it actually doesn't. One of those examples have been when the ANC, Vali Musa's party, decided 4 years ago that it was going to tell South Africans that the Constitution is a stumbling block to land reform, which is just false. But people believed it. They believed it. And then it changed 4 years later. They still believed it. Because last year in October, it met in Parliament, and then it says, well, the Constitution is not the stumbling block. Everyone had forgotten that 4 years earlier, it said it was, which is why it spent so much money on a futile amendment. So the key is to make people their own agents of the Constitution, their own interpretation, their own understanding. And so that's the big job of civil society. The second big job of civil society is strengthening institutions. This idea that we can have a revolution in this country that has no institutions is a far-fetched idea. There is no revolution anywhere in the world that can function without strong institutions. Some of those institutions are institutions of service delivery. Others are accountability institutions, but they ought to be strengthened. What that means is that institutions must hire the right people. Take, for instance, the Hawks. When we had a crisis about who was going to lead the Hawks. And the right people means people that have got an ethical compass. And that means people that are appropriately qualified. And that means people with the right experience. So if you do not fix your institutions, democracy is in peril. So those are the two that I think are at the forefront, is a general empowerment scheme for people to understand their rights, but also civil society focusing its energies on ensuring the institutions are strong. I can give you many examples about this. In local government, which is at the heartbeat of service delivery, municipal managers are employed with a matric. Some of those with matrics, in fact, perhaps may know the job, but the vast majority of them, because they simply do not have post-matric qualifications, haven't got the abilities. It should be part and parcel of the human rights discourse that we should be hiring appropriately qualified people. Many municipalities do not have engineers, civil engineers, but they are responsible for availability of water, availability of toilets, availability of roads, but they do not have civil engineers. Many municipalities do not have chartered accountants, but they are responsible every year to ensure that their books of account are in order. But we do not link the absence of those skills to human rights. And we wonder why we are in such a mess. Of course, everyone knows the crisis of corruption because the Zondo Commission has exposed this. But I'm arguing that the institutions ought to be strengthened. NGOs ought to be asking for a list of all the qualifications of the officials. It is a scandal in many municipalities that I've been to that there are no engineers, not even technicians. Most of the work is outsourced. So that's what I'm talking about when I'm saying we need to advance and deepen democracy. I mean, we need to build the institutions up because that is where the democracy has been destroyed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tembeka. Vali, there's a question to you again. How do we turn voter apathy and poor turnout around?
Yeah, I think one of the big dangers that we need to guard against as a society is voter apathy. Because in the last election, and I haven't yet seen the research work that has been done about the voter turnout and why people didn't vote. But when people don't vote, what it means is they begin to feel that their vote does not count. And they begin to feel that whether they vote or not, it doesn't make a difference. Things will still be the same. You hear sometimes people saying, nothing is going to change if I vote. I'm not going to waste my time. And once people begin to think that, means that in the long run, if a large enough number of people take a stand like that, then they would want to achieve their ambitions and fulfill their needs through means other than the law, because they feel the system does not work for them. And I think that is one of the greatest dangers that we have. And this brings me back to changing the Electoral Act. You know, the court has said that space must be made for independent candidates. But the manner in which we do it should make citizens feel that the Electoral Act is empowering them. They are empowered. right now, people say, we don't know how so-and-so got to parliament. Who puts these people there? You hear questions like those. And once you have that, you're going to have more apathy, because people will feel, well, I've been voting every time. You still find these people I don't want in parliament. And so I think this is a great danger. And we who have been struggling for democracy and continue to want to deepen our democracy should be very concerned about this matter. But I haven't looked at all of the research work to say exactly why people are moving in that direction and whether it's just a temporary thing, but it's a big worry.
No, thank you, Vali. And in fact, your point before your closing one now was, I must say again, as a member of the organization that you mentioned as well, you know, my good self, and we won't mention the name of the organization to protect the innocent parties involved here. But for me, how does a convicted rapist, I'm sorry, we won't go down, don't get me started here, I'm meant to be a neutral chair. So maybe on this, there's a question here to everyone. What is your view on a hybrid voting system at national level? And that is a hybrid of PR and constituency. I think that's for all three the panelists.
Yeah, while I haven't put my camera off, might just say that, you see, the Constitutional Court has said that the Constitution says that every citizen has a right to vote, and every citizen has a right to stand for office, and if elected, to occupy that office. So the Constitutional Court has said our current system gives everybody the right to vote, but does not give everybody the right to stand for elections, because it does not allow independence, and it requires Parliament, therefore, to fix the Electoral Act. And the only way to fix this really is to have some or other kind of a hybrid system, because our Constitution at the same time is not in favor of the UK type of system, which is the first past the post system, or some kind of system which they have in the United States, which creates the situation where the majority, more voters can vote for a party that doesn't, in the end, have the majority of the seats in Parliament. So it requires proportional representation, and a hybrid system, frankly, is a way to go. We all have our views on the matter as such, but probably the right thing to do is a hybrid system, which at the same time gives the voter the feeling that if I really want to put Cheryl Carolus in Parliament and I work hard enough for that, it is possible for me to do so. Right now, voters feel that no matter how hard I want to do that, it's not in my hands to do it. Other people will decide whether she goes to Parliament or not. So this is the empowerment of the voters that a hybrid system can create. Thank you, Cheryl.
Thanks, Vali. Tembeka and Cecilia, do you want to say anything on the hybrid voting system?
I have nothing useful to add. So usually you must keep quiet if you don't.
A lawyer says that. Can you believe it, Cecilia?
No, I was going to leave it to our esteemed advocate, but yeah, it's a big question. But yeah.
Sorry, I was just going to say, let's leave it to that. I think it is an open discussion. And as Vali has said, just remember, the Electoral Act is currently, and the reform of it is currently in that committee of Vali's. And it's one of the challenges I want to put out to all of us at the end, is, as Tembeka's pointed out,
correction, Chairperson, the electoral amendment bill is in Parliament. It's tabled in Parliament. The committee which I chaired doesn't exist anymore. Its recommendation has been rejected.
Well, so thank you, Vali. And I think the challenge is really, where do we stand on that? I'm not going to, I think we need to look at where we take that further in our organizations and so on. And so I'm just going to go on to some of the other questions here. There's one to all. What action can citizens take after the release of municipal structures with inappropriate placements? I'm not entirely sure what that, if you get it. What action can citizens take after the release of municipal structures with inappropriate placements? I guess it's where inappropriate people are pointed, really. There's another question here also to everyone. Given the capture of the ANC, does the solution not rest upon civil society organizations and citizens to reclaim their rights in the Constitution? And I want to say that we should probably be rounding off quite soon, because our stop point is 6:30. So if I can go back to my esteemed panelists and ask them if they wish to take up either one of those two questions.
Yes, perhaps let me deal with the capture point. The political system and any political class of any hue is always susceptible to capture by business interests or capture by inappropriate political interests. What we want under the Constitution, which is what it provides for, we want a system that can guarantee transparency, that can guarantee accountability, and a system that can guarantee implementation of the rights that are promised in the Constitution. The party system in South Africa under the ANC has proven to be unable to deliver on these promises. And that is why there is a clarion call everywhere else that it's the party system itself that needs to be dismantled so that people can have a real voice about who represents them. I think many people say the idea that 4,000 delegates potentially who can be bribed will elect a president for them. They question the legitimacy of those choices. But at the same time, the party system has its advantages if it is properly utilized. So my contribution to the discussion is working towards these underlying values that are in the Constitution. What system do we need that will create accountability, transparency, and the rule of law? And that is why what we need is a balanced system between a pure party system, which is what we have, and a pure constituency system. And we need the best of these two. My fear right now, listening to Vali Musa, is that we are headed towards a disaster, and not for the first time. And that disaster emanates from a lack of application of mind. And it emanates from the selfishness of the parliamentarians who are not thinking about the people, but are thinking about their seats. If that mindset can first change, perhaps we can make some progress.
Thank you very much, Tembeka. And in fact, I think we need to stick to our commitment in terms of time. And I can just firstly thank everyone who plugged in here. I must say there was one question which I haven't given time for, but I think that maybe if we can just get a quick comment from somebody, because I want to wrap up. Because I'm mindful of the fact that we have been supported on our journey through international solidarity. And I think it's a lesson that we need to take with the many struggles, brutal struggles that are currently raging across the world. And I won't start to mention examples. But I know there are a great number of people, comrades, friends who have supported our struggle and who continue to be mindful of that. And there was a question of seeing how can we actually how can international solidarity support us still at this stage in our journey? So quick one there. I don't know, Sishila, do you want to jump in on that one? Valley, were very centrally involved in mobilizing that international support to isolate the apartheid regime and to mobilize support for the mass democratic movement. Sishila? You're on mute, Sishila. Let's unmute you.
Oh, thank you. You know, I as you say, I have appreciated, and we've all worked hard to get international solidarity. I feel even shy to think that we should be expecting international solidarity when there is xenophobia in this country. That's the one thing. And also that we ourselves, I mean, you know, South Africa tends to be very parochial, navel gazing, and we can't just because we're in trouble now look out and look for other people to assist us. I think that question should be the other way around. We need to learn to work, oh gosh, sorry, in solidarity with other people in the world. We walked away after we got our independence. And so it's a bit uncomfortable for me to say how we can get more solidarity when we have turned our backs, literally and otherwise, away from the international community. And I don't mean the wars anywhere and stuff like that, but we're not, you know, we're not giving solidarity to on the continent, in Asia, you know, who remembers that there's a war in Yemen, that children are starving because of sanctions and war. We've cut ourselves off, at least as activists, I think. And therefore we need to reorganize ourselves to be engaged in the world again, rather than be requesting or expecting that the world should come to our rescue yet again. Thank you.
Thank you, Sishila. Valley, you want to say anything in conclusion on this matter, on the solidarity thing?
No, thank you. I have nothing further to add.
Tembeka?
No, it's definitely not my area of expertise.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, everybody. And I think that I can say, I can just see on the chat room, number of people are saying how great it was to just examine these matters in a safe place, but where we are robust and where we're not shy to engage with one another. And one person said that let this be a process of engagement, what is going on here today. And just to say that's exactly what the Defend Our Democracy campaign was all about. It was at a time of great darkness in our country, when we were all in despair, that our townships, our malls were burning, and we all felt quite despondent. And then we realized that part of our despondency was the fact that we were each in our own rooms fighting corners as civil society organizations, be it through the courts, be it through marches to parliament, be it through workshops. We were actually working and sometimes making significant progress, but no one even knew about it. And I think that that was why we set up the Defend Our Democracy campaign. And we hope that everyone in this room and everyone else whom you represent, because we know we obviously only had a limited number of spaces we could allow on this platform. Other people are watching on YouTube. We've got a number of channels, media channels from SABC and others who are live streaming our event. And so the many people who didn't even have the opportunity to put questions into the chat, we want to say, let us all take strength that in this past year, We have actually won some significant victories, but today we can sit here and we can notice, how did the Electoral Amendment Act actually just slip past us right on our watch? And my appeal to all of us is to remember what I said anecdotally in my opening remarks, that building democracy is not a spectator sport. In fact, it's a contact sport. It's hands-on, all hands on deck. And let us continue to draw strength and courage as we win the victories that we do. And let us know that the Constitution we have in our hands today, right as it stands, I'm sure there are things where we could think of where it needs to be fixed, but let us just start to use the institutions that are right there. Let us remember, before we burn tires, that, or we block the N3 highway, that actually our ward councillor is compelled by law, enabled by the Constitution, to convene ward committee meetings. The law compels them to do it. So before we throw that tire that stops children from going to school in the main road, in and out of our township, can we demand that the ward councillor actually comes to account to us, present their budget of what they're going to do with our money? Let us take this Constitution and let us use it to enable us. But more importantly, let us rally together as the civil society that we represent here on this platform tonight and strengthen these ones. Let us strengthen our NGOs, our non-government organizations who are in court, who are leading us in marches, in various civil society actions outside our hospitals, which are dysfunctional in Gauteng or wherever we live. Let us take courage today on Human Rights Day and actually say that we stand for something. We achieved great victories against an apartheid military machine, and we won. Let us not allow those who have valiantly been trying to steal our history and hijack our future, because we're actually stronger than them. There are far more good men and women. Let us unblock those voices. So I thank you all on behalf of the Defend Our Democracy campaign. Please watch the space. You're on our contact list because you registered with us at some point. So we will keep you posted about the upcoming conference. And we want you to prepare in your organizations, in your communities, wherever you find yourselves. Let us have a rich discussion at that conference. Thank you very much. Good night, everybody.
Good night, and thank you very much, Cheryl and participants.